The day the billionaire's daughter fired the entire staff, the elevators in the glass tower kept opening to floors that no longer belonged to anyone. Security badges stopped working mid-swipe, computer screens went dark, and people who had given years of their lives to the company walked out holding cardboard boxes in stunned silence. At the top floor, behind a wall of glass that overlooked a city built on ambition and exhaustion, a young woman barely 23 years old stood with red-rimmed eyes and a signature that had just changed hundreds of lives. She told herself it was strength. Everyone else called it cruelty. But no one knew what grief had done to her heart. If you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this remind us that even the coldest moments can hide the beginning of something beautiful. Her name was Alara Voss, the only daughter of tech billionaire Adrian Voss, a man who had built an empire from a garage and a stubborn refusal to quit. 3 weeks earlier, he had collapsed in this very building, his heart giving out between meetings, his last unfinished email still open on his screen. The board had handed control to Alara as majority heir, and the weight of it had crushed her before she even sat in his chair. She had grown up in penthouses and private schools, but not in the shadow of loss like this. Every hallway in the headquarters echoed with her father's memory. Every office chair looked like someone who might turn around and not be him. So she did the only thing grief and power sometimes combine to do. She burned everything down. Restructuring, she called it. A clean slate. No one could see how her hands shook after each signature. By noon, the once busy lobby was eerily quiet. The polished marble floors reflected the high ceiling lights like a hospital corridor after visiting hours. That was when the side service door opened, unnoticed by the last of the executives leaving, and a man in worn work shoes stepped inside carrying a mop bucket with a broken wheel that squeaked every few seconds. His uniform was a size too big, the fabric faded from too many washes, and a small pink hair tie was looped twice around his wrist, out of place against his rough hands. His name was Daniel Reyes, 32, single father, part-time night cleaner, who had picked up an emergency daytime shift because the agency was short-staffed after the mass layoffs. Daniel didn't know he had walked into the aftermath of a corporate storm. He only knew he needed the extra hours. His 6-year-old daughter Sophia had asthma, and her inhalers were getting more expensive every month. That morning, he had dropped her at school with a kiss on her forehead and a promise that he'd be home early enough to help with her science project about the solar system. Promises were sacred in his small apartment because they were often the only thing he could give in abundance. He started on the executive floor bathrooms, moving quietly, eyes down, careful not to disturb anything that looked expensive enough to cost more than his rent. When he stepped into the main corridor outside the CEO office, he saw her for the first time. Alara stood alone by the floor-to-ceiling windows, arms crossed tightly, staring at the city as if daring it to challenge her. She looked nothing like the ruthless headlines already forming online. She looked young, lost, and very tired. Daniel kept his distance, pushing the mop slowly across the shining floor. He had mastered the art of invisibility, cleaners often did, but as he passed the glass wall of the CEO office, his bucket wheel caught on the edge of a rug and tipped. Water sloshed out, spreading fast toward a stack of documents near the doorway. Without thinking, he lunged forward, dropping to his knees, using his own sleeve to block the water from reaching the papers. It was an instinct born from years of preventing small disasters before they became big ones. Alara turned at the sound, ready to snap at whoever had the audacity to make noise in her grief-stricken fortress, but the words died before they formed. She saw a man kneeling on the floor, arms soaked, desperately protecting files that had probably just erased his job along with everyone else's. There was no anger on his face, only focus, like this small act mattered. He gathered the papers carefully, aligning the edges, placing them on a dry table as if they were priceless artifacts. When he stood, embarrassed, he noticed her watching and immediately lowered his gaze. He apologized in a soft voice she barely heard, explaining he would clean it properly, that he didn't mean to cause trouble. Trouble. The word hung between them, heavy with irony. As he worked, Alara's eyes drifted to the pink hair tie on his wrist. It looked so fragile, so ordinary, in a place designed to impress. Something about it tugged at a memory of simpler days, before board meetings and legal teams, when her father used to tie her hair himself before school, his large hands clumsy but patient. She asked him about it, her voice thinner than she expected. He told her it belonged to his daughter, that she slipped it onto his wrist every morning so he'd remember to come back. He said it with a small smile that held more love than complaint. That was when Alara noticed how carefully he cleaned, how he moved around framed photos on desks, straightening them instead of ignoring them. On one desk was a picture of her father laughing at a company picnic. Daniel paused, wiped the frame gently, and placed it back exactly where it had been, like he understood that memories deserved respect. Grief cracked something open in her. For weeks, everyone around her had spoken in legal terms, financial forecasts, damage control. No one had mentioned love or family or the quiet terror of losing the one person who made the world feel navigable. Yet here was a man who had almost nothing, still carrying his world around his wrist in the shape of a child's hair tie. She asked about his life, and though he kept it brief, she could see the outlines of sacrifice in the worn fabric of his uniform, in the way he checked his phone only once and quickly, probably between school notifications and shift schedules. He never complained, he just worked. Later that afternoon, alone in her father's old office, Alara opened his last unfinished email. It wasn't about mergers or stock prices. It was a draft about expanding the company's employee childcare program, a note to himself about how many talented workers struggled because they had no support at home. He had written, "A company isn't software, it's people with lives." She read the line over and over until the words blurred. For the first time since his death, she cried without trying to hide it. The next morning, the lobby buzzed again, not with firings, but with phone calls asking former employees to return. The restructuring plan was revised overnight. A new department was announced: family support services, flexible schedules, childcare partnerships. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. The board was shocked. Investors were cautious. But Alara, for the first time, felt like she was building instead of destroying. Daniel showed up for his next shift expecting the same silence, the same invisible routine. Instead, he found orientation signs being set up and familiar faces walking back in, confused but hopeful. He didn't know the role he had played. He only knew that when he passed the CEO office, the young woman inside gave him a small nod of thanks that felt deeper than words. Weeks later, a package arrived at his apartment. A full scholarship sponsorship for Sophia's education, quietly arranged through a company foundation in memory of Adrian Voss. No spotlight, no publicity, just a note that said every child deserved a future as bright as the stars she was studying. Daniel sat at his kitchen table holding the letter, the pink hair tie still around his wrist, and felt something he hadn't in a long time, relief that didn't come with a catch. Before this story ends, take a second to comment where you're watching from and share one act of kindness you've seen change someone's life. Alara still had hard days. Grief didn't vanish because of one decision. But now, when she looked out over the city from the glass tower, she didn't see a battlefield. She saw millions of quiet stories, parents making promises, children tying hair ties around wrists, people holding on. And she understood that power wasn't in how many people you could dismiss with a signature, but in how many lives you could steady with one. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and engage with the video, because sometimes the smallest moments, a spilled bucket, a pink hair tie, a stranger's quiet love, can remind us that humanity is still the most powerful force in any room.